Alright, today we're going to be talking about 10 overpowered magics in Fairy Tail. So, everybody knows Fairy Tail has some pretty overpowered magic, but it's not what you think it is. I don't know what you think it is, but it's probably not that. Alright, first one. Rock of Succubus. So, this is pretty goofy ability, but basically, this guy plays a guitar, and you just become his slave, or succubus, or roadie, or whatever. And there's not really, they never say there's any way to counter it or beat it, like, at all. In the show, the way it works is, he does it on Juvia, and then he just chooses not to do it on Lucy because, I don't know, he wants to see him fight, I guess. And then Lucy's able to summon Aquarius using Juvia's body, which like, they then beat him using that, but like that just doesn't make any sense. Like, he could have just used that on both. Like, there's no, I mean, there probably is a weakness, but they haven't said what the weakness is. So, I mean, until they say what the weakness is, we have to assume it's just completely overpowered. I mean, what if this guy uses it on Xerath? I mean, come on, that'd be just broken. And they never say he can't, so frick it. Okay, Law. This magic's pretty OP. So basically, you just defeat anyone who you think is evil, and they never say there's any sort of restriction on it or whatever. And after using it, you get the Curse of Ankh-Saram, which basically makes you immortal, which is pretty overpowered if you think about it. I mean, obviously, you know, if you love anybody, they die, but I mean, being immortal is pretty OP as well. So I don't know. That's kind of a trade-off. And there's no counter, as far as we know. I mean, we've never seen one be able to counter it. So Fairy Law is basically the same thing as Law, but you just don't get cursed after using it, which is either plus or minus, depending on what you think. The only time we've ever seen it be countered is when Prek used Grimoire Law, which is basically the same thing, but like purple. So, yeah, I don't know. That's pretty OP. We've never seen there be. I mean, he used it in the final arc against that huge army, and then he turned it to stone, and everybody thought he was going to die. But it's Fairy Tail, so he just doesn't die. So we just have to assume there's no weaknesses to it. So, yeah. I mean, again, this guy uses it on Xerath. Why wouldn't it work? I mean, maybe you need more magic power than them, but, I mean, they never say that, so frick it. Fairy Sphere. So you just envelop a space into a bubble. It's completely indestructible, as far as we've seen. The contents are in stasis, and they don't experience time. So, in theory, you could just put your enemy into the bubble, and they're completely cooked, which is what they did to Akinogia, and he got completely cooked. So, yeah, this is pretty OP. I mean, again, you put your enemy in here, and what are they going to do? There's nothing they can do. Even if they had a way of breaking out of it, it doesn't matter, because, like, you can't break out of something instantly, because the time way, like, you're locked in time. The only reason this isn't higher on the list is because the only time we've ever seen it used is Mavis on Tenor Island, but she was like a spirit or something, so that probably doesn't count. And then when they used it on Actilogia, it was literally the entire continent coming together to use their magic. So we just have to assume that it takes too much magic for any individual to use. So this one's pretty OP as well. Ice Slave. You just put a collar of ice on the target's neck. They lose all free will and they must obey your commands, and there's no known weaknesses. So obviously, I mean, there's a reason they call him Invel, because he's an incel, because you know what he does with this ability. But, like, even still, like, what do you do against this? Like, okay, in the show, he used it against Juvia and Grey, and then Juvia just, like, managed to kill herself before Grey could kill her, which, I mean, okay, but, like, they don't explain how that happened or anything, so we just have to assume it was a fluke. But either way, like, you know, what's stopping Invel from just putting this ability on Xerath's neck and saying, I'm the king now? Like, what do you do against that? There's nothing you can do. I mean, he's the him, you know, he's him. So yes, his ability isn't higher though, because, well, Juvia was able to break out of it, so it's probably not that OP. And then Command T, this is where stuff starts to get really OP. So basically you can change the size of any object. You could just make your opponent's part bigger than their body and they just explode and die. You could turn your opponent into the size of an ant, and there's not much they can do, right? I mean, so, like, what do you do against that? I mean, she was able to reduce the size of E&D's Demon Seed inside of Natsu to be small enough to where it didn't do anything. But if you think about it, it's OP, because, well, I mean, the Demon Seed should be OP, but this is even more OP, I guess. I don't know. And there's no known weaknesses or counters to this. This has never been countered or defeated in any way. The only reason it's not higher is because, in theory, it would take at least, at least a fraction of a second in order for your expanding heart to kill you, versus the other abilities on this list can just kill you instantly. Okay, Transpoint. This is used by Jacob, and you just put a target in your pocket dimension by clapping, and there's no weaknesses, except for this one character who apparently has an ability that just counters it, because it counters all space magic, but we don't know how he got that ability, or if anybody else has any idea how to get it. And if it wasn't for him, we'd be completely cooked, because this guy can just put whatever he just put you in his pocket dimension, and what are you going to do? Well, there's nothing you can do. He put the entire Fairy Tail guild in his dimension, except for Natsu and Lucy, because they were, not in the guild hall at that time. And, like, there's just no counter. I mean, they never say there's any counter. The only way they were able to counter it was by tricking him into getting one of the guys out of the ability, and then they were able to summon Gemini copy of Marin, which is able to counter that. Like, it was just so convoluted. And he was about to clap again to put everybody back in the freaking Netherrealm or whatever. But then Happy got in the middle of his hands, which stopped him from clapping, which is just silly. So, like, if he had just clapped a little bit faster and Happy wasn't there, like, would the show just be over? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why can't he just put Zeref or Acnologia in the other dimension, I mean, there's probably a reason, but again, they haven't said what the reason is, so until then, we have to assume this ability is just completely overpowered. I mean, what do you do against it? There's nothing you can do. They say, he's not as powerful as Brandish or Irene, but there's no reason as to why you can't just put them in the freaking Netherrealm, right? So, I don't know. Seems more OP than me. Alright. Odge Seal. So, Demaria's ability, this is pretty freaking OP, because you could stop time for as long as you want, and just spam as much as you want. So this should be number 1, but because it's Fairy Tail, there's stuff that's somehow more powerful than this, because this is literally an instant win button. As soon as you clack your teeth together, you've just won, because you can just slit your opponent's throat. Or, take them and, put handcuffs on them or something. I mean, that's what she does to Natsu and Lucy right here. I mean, this guy's literally the main character. Like, she just zero-dipped the main character without even doing anything, just because she could stop time. Like, what? How is that even fair? Like, how do you not just defeat everybody? I mean, at the beginning of the final arc, if she wanted, she could have just stopped time, killed everyone in Fiore, and Zeref could have just walked into Fairy Tail and took Mavis, and it would have been that simple. I mean, she literally could have prevented the entire series from happening on the first instant of the show. But literally, the only reason she doesn't is because she's just trolling. She thinks it's more fun to cut people's clothes off or make them get naked or whatever, just like Fairy Tail logic, right? And there's no weaknesses at all, except for one weakness, which we will get to. Okay, so Nakagami armor. It says the user becomes immune to magic and there's no known weaknesses. Why doesn't she use it more often? I don't know. It's just anime logic. I mean, she says it takes a lot of magic, but I mean, it's better than being dead, right? I'd rather be out of magic than be dead. So she could have used this against Demaria, we assume, but again, she just didn't because she didn't feel like it. I mean, they never fought, but, when Odge Seal was used, if she was wearing Nakagami armor, she would have been walking around in the stopped time. She could have gone and fought Demaria, so I don't know. This is very silly. I mean, this is probably, maybe it was just Mashima, like, he accidentally wrote the user becomes immune to magic, because that doesn't really make any sense. How come she only used it in one fight in the entire show and then never used it again? That doesn't really make much sense, but yeah. And she didn't use it at all in the final arc. I mean, the only explanation is she lost it or something. I don't know, maybe she sold it, but yeah, this is pretty OP. Okay, Books of Zeref. This is the true most overpowered magic, because it's able to create the Aetherius race, which is able to bypass Odge Seal, as well as bypass the Nakagami armor, because they use curses instead of magic, so they're able to beat the Nakagami armor, and Natsu was able to bypass the Odge Seal using plot armor, so Zeref literally is able to just just counter everything because he's created this race of people that don't use magic and they don't get their time stopped with the Arsteal. So yeah, this is basically OP. I mean, when I first saw Demaria's ability, I'm like, okay, this is pretty OP. But then I'm like, okay, well, somehow there's two things that are even more OP than it, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, this is basically like people saying, I win, you lose, I win, you lose, I win, you lose, I win. Like, that's basically what these abilities are, the top 5 abilities. Right? It's just silly, but yeah, and basically any of these any abilities on this list would just be completely overpowered. And there's no counters to any of them, really. So, yeah, great stuff. So if you ever want to know why what the most overpowered Magic and Fairy Tale are, there you go. Yeah. Thanks for watching.